The wife's plan didn't work out as she'd hoped. It should have been more challenging, but it was almost too easy. In fact, if she'd known it would be so simple, she probably would have done it much sooner. She wondered why she'd waited so long to try it. Alex stretched languidly in her lover's bed, turning onto her right side. She got up and walked to the bathroom, turned on the shower, adjusted the temperature, and climbed in quickly, soaping herself up. She was very careful around the slightly sore area. She was about to when Trey came into the room. She turned off the water while they switched places. 15 minutes later, the couple was ready to go. The man leaned towards her, but the woman pulled away slightly so his kiss wouldn't smear the lipstick on her newly painted lips. "Let's stick to the plan," she said, "and then we can do this for a long time." "I'm sorry," he replied. "You're right," she said. "Your lips are so nice to kiss." The woman smiled radiantly for the first month. At least this part of her life was going exactly as she'd planned. She hadn't expected anything less, in fact she'd expected it to go on much longer. Some might call what Alex and Trey had been doing on Wednesday afternoon an affair, but she thought the term affair was too crude. Alex loves Trey and considers their Wednesday meetings to be more than just a fling. Alexis Temple wasn't looking for love when she found it for the second time. She had been happily married to Chris Temple for 12 years when she met Trey Leem at an executive board meeting at Parkfield Hospital 4 months earlier. Alexis is the Director of Human Resources at Parkfield and Trey is the new marketing representative for Riley Gordon, the hospital's public relations firm. Trey was dressed in a charcoal gray pinstriped suit that was clearly tailored to his athletic body, 5'3" and 102 pounds. His brown hair is wavy and thick and his big brown eyes flash when he speaks. When she looks at him, over the next few months, she felt a tingling sensation between her legs. They chatted a few times before Alex realized that her feelings for Trey were more than superficial. Calling it an affair would be wrong, it's a relationship she has nothing to apologize for or feel guilty about. On Saturday afternoon, Chris Temple went to the mailbox and picked up a handful of letters and miscellaneous correspondence that had been thrown in there that day. 2 envelopes from the state of Indiana were among them. Indiana, which contained license plate stickers and printed registration papers for 2023. Chris opened the envelope, added the new sticker to his license plate and put the registration in the glove compartment of his car. He then opened the envelope addressed to his wife, added a new sticker to her license plate and attempted to put her registration in the glove compartment, but the glove compartment was locked. Chris thought with anger, who locks their glove compartment? As he walked back into the house, grabbed his wife's car keys from the shelf, opened the glove compartment and dropped the new registration in there. He closed the drawer and was about to leave when he had a funny thought. He opened the glove compartment again and looked inside. There he found the car's owner's manual, the last 3 registrations and a cell phone. The only thing that surprised him at this point was that he'd left his phone in there. Chris muttered to himself. He knew his wife was upstairs in the shower as she had been. It was a custom of hers for the past 6 months, she'd come home about 20 minutes early after her Saturday morning workout and, as usual, go straight into the shower. He leisurely turned on his phone and waited for it to fully load before looking at the call history. She didn't expect anyone to find her phone, so she didn't bother clearing the call history. There was a short list of calls but a long list of texts, all from one treble before he even looked through those texts. He realized that his 13 after reading the messages. Chris realized that his marriage was over. He turned his phone off, put it back in the glove compartment and locked it again. He hung his wife's keys back on the coat rack and listened for a moment. Hearing the shower still running upstairs, he went outside to mow the yard and think. Reports told Chris that his wife had been having an ongoing affair with Trey Leem for almost a year now. He remembered that her late Wednesday nights at the office had started around that time. Apparently, she would take a long lunch break and then add it to the end of the day so she had time to work. About 6 months ago, they added Saturday mornings to their game days. Chris remembered that it coincided with the start of his wife's class at the local gym. He got a bit emotional. He slammed both hands on the lawn mower handle, and the sound of the mower came from the second floor bedroom. Alex smiled. She knew that Chris liked to mow the yard, both for exercise and because he liked the look of a well as she got ready for the rest of Saturday. She realized she was lucky to have an adoring husband and a hot young lover. It had been almost a year since Alex had expanded her intimate life to include Trey, and everything was going well thanks to careful planning and good organization. Her life was more fulfilling than ever. She had a loving husband, 2 wonderful children, a great job and a 29-year-old. Her second husband filled the emotional and physical gaps she thought she had in her marriage. There were times when she felt almost depressed, but for the most part, she knew she was living life to the fullest. She had a second love, a lover. She had completed her life goals. She wasn't taking the easy way out. She was living her life to the fullest. This day, it meant being able to make love to 2 different men. It was very lustful and always resulted in mind-blowing sex. She enjoyed the variety, and when she managed to get her husband to make love to her in the evening after her lover had made love to her earlier in the day, she was happy to oblige. After making love with Trey, Alex always showered and cleaned herself thoroughly, so she had no problem if Chris initiated lovemaking with her on such evenings. In fact, after she made sure that her husband couldn't find out that she had been doing it earlier in the day, she was happy to go along with it. Alex started initiating on her own to get extra excitement from her own naughtiness. The relationship between Alex and Trey was actually one of love, not just lust. The young man was warm and intelligent, and his interests were different from her husband's, which made her life more fulfilling. Trey knew from the beginning that she was married and loved her husband, but she had more than enough love to include Trey in her heart as well. In terms of love, Trey is 13 years younger than her husband and more determined. He has abs and about 14 pounds of extra muscle on his body. Their lovemaking was also different. With Chris, they usually made slow, passionate love, while with Trey it was harder and more physically intense. Alex had been able to make love to the 2 men that Saturday, as Chris had slipped away. Evening, he excused himself, looking a little out of sorts. He'd been mowing and had to admit that he looked tired. Chris was pleased that he hadn't thrown up when Alex tried to start something. He was lying facing Alex and thinking about how many times his wife had given him sloppy seconds. Chris was the vice president of finance at a medium-sized tool and die company. Every morning he got to work at 7, at 8 o'clock, he filled a capsule in his coffee maker and checked his email. 15 He went into the office of production manager Bob Casey, who was divorced from his wife of 15 years. "Do you have a few minutes for something personal, Bob?" Chris asked. "Sure," Bob replied, and when Chris came in and closed the door behind him, Bob thought, "This can't be good." 5 minutes later, Bob had already heard the whole story from Chris and was on the phone with his divorce attorney, who was an old college friend of his. Bob's friend had hosted Chris at his off-schedule and office meeting for that same day. Alex was shocked when she was handed her divorce papers the following Wednesday at the hospital. She'd been out on a date with Trey and hadn't realized that her husband had been unhappy in their marriage. She'd completely missed the irony and how timely the papers were handed to her while she was trying to piece things together. The thought of Chris finding out about her relationship with Trey hadn't even crossed her mind. Once she'd calmed down, Alex called her husband. "Why did I do wrong?" she asked through her tears. "You've been having an affair for about a year now and you still can't figure out why I'm divorcing you." Alex was stunned for the second time in a few minutes. She continued to sob but had no words for Chris, so he ended the conversation as Chris expected. Alex was waiting for him. When he got back to the office, rather than staying late as usual, "Would Mr. McCoy mind if you didn't make up the hours for that long lunch?" Chris asked as he came in from the garage. "I love you, honey. You know I do. I'm sorry I didn't tell you about Trey, but I felt like it was best for everyone," Alex replied. "For everyone?" Chris interrupted. "Your lover and you aren't everyone. What about me? Aren't I part of everyone?" "Yes, you are," Alex said. She said quietly, "I guess I need to explain." "You think so?" Chris snorted. I didn't tell you about Trey because I knew you wouldn't understand and you'd mess it up like you're doing now. She began, I'm messing up. I'm sorry. What exactly am I ruining? Chris roared, I'm not happy about this. I wasn't looking for this relationship, Chris. It just happened, and I'm glad I did. Trey is a wonderful man. I'm sure you'll like him once you get to know him better. This is so much more than an affair. It's so much more than love. It's so much more than lust. I love him as much as I love you, Chris. I couldn't give Trey up any more than I could give you up. But we're married, so I can't love two men at the same time. Chris said, yes, you can. Being married doesn't mean you can automatically turn off your emotions or love. You're my first love. He's my second. I can love more than one man at a time. It's not a question of one or the other, Alex said. Trey knows that I already have a full life. He's willing to be satisfied with the little time I have for him. You and the family get the lion. I've taken nothing away from you and the kids. I've just added something for me, besides you and the kids. Trey is not your husband, he's an interventionist. He should be grateful for any time he gets from you, but I am your husband, and you have two kids. All that time should be given to us, Chris said. I love my life the way it is now, and I don't want to change anything. I need all of you. Alex said he doesn't want a divorce. I didn't want my wife to sleep with another man either. We don't always get everything we want, Chris said. Remember when we got married, baby? Remember the words love, honor and cherish? How what you have with another man can love, honor or cherish me? You make it sound so dirty and disgusting. Alex said there's nothing like that here from your point of view. Maybe from my point of view, there definitely is. Chris said the argument ended when the couple's two children came downstairs to greet their father. Both parents knew their children had heard the raucous conversation. The children were 13. Josh is 13 and his sister is 10. Old Kayla looked pretty uncomfortable. I'm sorry you had to hear that, Chris said. We'll try to act more mature in the future, but yes, we're getting a divorce. We both still love you both, and you guys had nothing to do with our breakup. I agree with everything your father said except that there won't be a divorce. Alex said he won't be selfish enough to ruin your lives because of something that happened to him, and he won't ruin your life because he isn't the one who cheated. How could you cheat on Dad? Kayla wailed. Alex wrinkled her nose in displeasure. She looked first at her daughter, then at her husband. Watch your mouth, Kay. I'm still your mother. Alex snarked. Only because I can't divorce you, the girl shot back and ran up the stairs to her room. Well, that was nice, Chris said to no one in particular. I think we should have a family meeting while we eat. Josh went to get his sister so they could talk. Alex sat and looked at the other three members of her family. They had a frank discussion about her infidelity and impending divorce. He told the kids that he was filing for joint custody instead of letting Alex have custody of them. You can't take my kids away from me, Chris said angrily. I'm not going to, but you won't get primary custody either. You can't cheat and make me a father just for the weekend. So who's the guy you're cheating on Dad with? Josh asked. That's hardly appropriate, young man, Alex replied. The kids are old enough to hear the truth, no matter what you want them to. Chris took a few minutes to tell the kids everything he had learned about Trey over the past week. Alex was surprised at how much her husband knew about her lover. He was already in the habit of surprising her, and he wasn't shy about telling his children what he had learned. Alex spent most of this part of the conversation looking at her plate. There's no divorce, kids. I just need to get your father to look into it. Alex said as she took the empty plate and glass and left for the kitchen, at things the right way. Both kids looked at Chris, who shrugged. They both knew their father well enough to realize that he was not the kind of man who would put up with a cheating wife. Finished with dinner, the kids headed straight to their rooms, but not before Josh said, "We're here if you need us, Dad. We'll talk, but we don't want to get in the path of stray bullets, if you know what I mean." Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. After dinner, Chris replied, "The family usually gathers in the common room to watch a movie or a few TV shows unless the kids are busy doing homework." Alex was sitting in the living room, ostensibly reading a book, when Chris retired to the common room to watch a program called Jeopardy! He smiled to himself as he sat down at the table, knowing that Alex hadn't read a book in months. Sitting in the living room, Alex held back tears as she pondered and occasionally turned the page of the book. It looked like she was reading 6 hours ago. She had thought she had the perfect life, but now she realized that her marriage was hanging by a thread and her perfect life would go down the drain if she couldn't make her husband understand what she wanted and what she needed. Chris framed her relationship with Trey as a vulture, almost a boss when it's really not, according to Alex. Her husband is a good man, maybe even a wonderful man, but he's not without his faults and weaknesses. Having Trey in her life, they filled those gaps, and their love was a manifestation of their feelings, not a fulfillment of lust. Well, she had to admit that she'd kept her relationship with Trey a secret from Chris because she knew her husband would never allow it, but now that he found out, the relationship seemed wrong. Alex thought she had thought of every detail to keep her relationship with Trey a secret and had even envisioned every little detail, including the fact that their sex life remained pretty much the same as it had. She'd been doing this before Trey came along, without increasing or decreasing the amount or intensity of their lovemaking. She racked her brain trying to figure out how her husband had suddenly figured this out until a few hours ago. Alex had considered herself the smarter spouse, as well as Al. She'd managed to hide her relationship with Trey for almost a year. She had to admit that the first time Chris had enjoyed her body a few hours after Trey had not only turned her on more than Alex was 13 years older than Trey, but she still looked and felt young. She had a beautiful face, was intelligent and outgoing. Trey only asked her to add a second day to their weekly dates. At first, Alex refused, but after a month she enthusiastically agreed, and so began Alex's Saturday classes. Trey tried to sympathize with Alex's situation as they met. After work, they often met for lunch at a restaurant in a remote area. Alex had called the young man to make an appointment shortly after she arrived at her office. "Alex, if you get divorced, it'll give us more time to socialize." "It's not a bad thing for me, either," Trey said, taking a bite out of his sandwich. "But I know you don't want a divorce. Do we really have to break up?" "I hope not. I hope I can get him to see things my way," Alex replied. "He's always been reasonable. I know he still. If I can appeal to his sense of justice, I'd like to try to keep you both happy." Trey cut in, "Why should your husband have to give up anything? He loves me and I just need to make him realize that maintaining the status quo makes me happy and doesn't affect our love for each other," she said, "but until I can convince him, I think we need to calm down a bit. It'll only hurt the cause if I look like I'm rubbing his face in it." Chris wasn't surprised when Alex didn't show up for her practice. On Saturday morning, he knew she was smart enough to back off from her relationship with Trey, at least for now. He just needed to test the waters to see how she'd react. "You might as well go to your lover," he said, sitting down with Alex in the common room while their kids were playing outside. "I've already filed for divorce, but I might change my mind." "Do you love me more than Chris and the kids?" She replied, "I love you all equally, but in different ways," she said. "What's your point?" "My point is that people can love many people on many different levels. Different and the same at the same time. I love you and the kids and Trey all the same and yet different at the same time. I can't give up loving any of you. I love you, Chris, and I need you. You are my husband and the father of my children. You can have me most of the time, but I also love Trey in a different way and at the same time, just like you. However, since he is not part of our family, he has to make do with a smaller portion of my time, although he would like more. He has accepted that role. If you love me as much as you always say you do, you would graciously accept your dominant role and be happy for yourself and for me. Family is what we say it is." Alex said, "I want to include it in. I'm a good wife and mother. Of course, you can have a lover outside our family if you love me as much as you say you do. I won't let you do that, though," I don't love you as much as I did 2 weeks ago. You can't stop loving someone overnight. But you've been disrespectful to me over the last year, Chris. Alex said, I love you as much as I always have, Chris said, then you've never loved me as much as I love you. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to have a lover. Alex's eyes got big when they first met with the lawyers. Chris's attorney brought up the sale of the house and the vision of assets. I don't want a divorce, Alex said. Well, it's going to happen, so get used to it. We need to sell the house so we can both afford something bigger than a closet. You broke our vows, and I don't see why I should trust your promises. You'll figure out a way for me not to catch you next time and cheat behind my back. Chris said it's not about winning. You lost our kids and Alex. She lowered her head in shame. What if I let you have your own toy? Would we be even? She asked you. You just don't understand, Al. I want what I want, I guess just you and I. Chris felt bad when his father a week later, Chris's mother-in-law and father-in-law called to ask why he and their daughter were getting a divorce. He figured that since they were her parents, she should be the one to tell them. He had always gotten along great with Alex's parents, calling them mom and dad just like he did his own parents. I'm sorry guys, he said sadly. I didn't call because I thought Alex would tell you. You know what they say when you assume. The law was pretty upset when Chris told them both that their daughter had been cheating on him with Trey. Are you sure, son, that doesn't sound like my girl? They were both shocked. What on earth was going on? George shouted, what do you know about this? He's a good guy. George, you'd like him. She's not cheating. She loves them both. Thelma said, what on earth are you talking about? And it seems that the law was aware of Alex's infidelity but maintained that it wasn't cheating because her daughter loved both men. Thelma retorted that if it's polyamory, why doesn't she have anyone on the side and why wasn't she informed of these plans? She then accused George of keeping quiet about her affair with Chris. George apologized and said that he thought Chris was a good guy. Thelma said, meet him. I don't want to meet my daughter's boyfriend. He wouldn't make love to a married woman if he was such a nice guy. Alex had been wishing for a week that Trey would get to spend time with his kids. She tried her best to avoid seeing Trey during the first week that Chris had the kids, but after a week of crying, she practically begged to spend time with Trey the next time Chris was away with the kids. That first Monday when Alex stayed overnight, Trey made dinner and dessert for the first time since they'd been together. Trey had ordered from his favorite Italian restaurant and everything was ready when Alex walked in on him after work. There were candles and everything, which was very kind of Trey. Alex thought to herself that she could get used to being treated like that. Trey had also turned on her favorite music, classical, on the stereo for the entire dinner. She smiled broadly at the young man, noting to herself that her now ex-husband only liked classic rock. Her husband only liked classic rock, but she smiled even wider when, after the meal was over, he lifted her to her feet and spun her in a slow dance to a few songs. They cleaned themselves up and retired to Trey's bedroom, where they spent the rest of the night making love, first gently and then more vigorously. Maybe the th force won't be so bad after all, she thought to herself. Trey was really happy when he woke up in Alex's arms in the morning. He pressed himself tighter against the woman's round bottom and began to rock gently. Alex was physically tired when she left Trey's house late Sunday night to pick up the kids from Chris's house. She and Trey had made love late Friday night, 4 times on Saturday and 2 more times on Sunday. They had a 29-year age gap. Alex's old partner was physically much more difficult than she was used to. A month later, Alex dragged herself to the car again to pick up the kids, as had become customary. She was quite satisfied sexually, but on the way home, she felt something was missing. It seemed that the more time she spent with Trey, the more their relationship grew sexually and deteriorated emotionally. She rubbed her right wrist, reminding herself of the scratch she'd gotten when Trey had handcuffed her to the headboard of the bed. She had to admit that the sex while handcuffed had been incredible, but at the same time she felt a bit devalued. She realized that Trey had forced her into submission when he pulled out the handcuffs. She was reluctant at first, but he got over it quickly. She then lay down separately from the younger man, noting to herself that Chris had never made her feel anything other than an equal partner in bed. She mentally brushed it off, deciding that there was probably just a generational difference between her ex-husband and Trey. Her husband and her lover, even though the kids knew about Trey. In the week she had the kids, Alex only interacted with him a couple of times a week and always during work hours. She had yet to introduce her second love to the kids. On Wednesday, when Alex called, Trey didn't answer his cell phone or return her call. She called him on his work phone on Thursday at noon because he hadn't called. The receptionist at Riley Gordon wasn't keen to discuss Trey's whereabouts until Alex revealed that she was Trey's girlfriend and couldn't reach him. He'd been in hospital since Tuesday night. The other end of the phone said that he'd apparently got into a fight outside his favorite sports bar and got hurt pretty badly. Perhaps that's why you couldn't reach him. The receptionist gave Alex the information she needed and within minutes she was on her way to the hospital. 15 minutes later, I was looking at Trey's battered face. "Why didn't you call me? I found out 2 days later from your administrator, Alex, that he couldn't decipher the expression in Trey's eyes because of his injuries. He had a broken nose, 2 black eyes, and she found out 2 broken ribs and bruised testicles because of your ex. I know Trey said that my husband did this to me. He muttered that the unscrupulous bastard didn't do it himself. He paid someone to do it. He'll pay for everything when the police catch those 2 thugs. No, that can't happen. Chris is too good to do this. He's the kind of guy who would divorce me as soon as possible but would never hurt anyone. I guess that's why I thought I could have 2 husbands." Alex said, "Yeah, and how did that turn out?" Trey growled, "I'm telling you, he's a wuss, not the nice guy you think he is. He's going to end up in jail. I'm not going to be ceremonious with him just because he's the father of your children. I'm sure he didn't do it, but still, Trey, you should have called me. I shouldn't have found out 2 days after something happened, considering how cold and calculating Chris had been when he filed for divorce." Alex couldn't be sure that her husband hadn't been involved in the attack on Trey. If he hadn't been, she'd have to admit that she was partly responsible for the beating herself. "What the hell, Chris? Does your ego feel better now?" she shouted at her ex when he answered the phone later that afternoon. "Hey, what the hell are you yelling for?" Chris said quietly. "I'm not sure," Chris replied, perplexed as to what his ex wanted. "My wife was babbling on about how nice a try Chris had made. Trey is really angry and hurting badly. When the cops fought you, you're going to jail. I won't be able to calm him down," she said. "Whatever you say," Chris replied and ended the conversation. He still didn't understand what Alex was yelling about. Alex had to admit, Chris seemed genuinely puzzled by what she was saying. She wondered how he'd managed to become so adept at feigning innocence. The police arrived at Chris's house about 20 minutes after he'd spoken to Alex on the phone. "I'd made coffee. I'd been waiting for you guys since my girlfriend called a few minutes ago. From what she said, I'm guessing something happened to her beloved second husband, and I'm suspect number 1. Chris said he poured coffee for both officers and answered their questions patiently for about 15 minutes as they left. The officers agreed that it didn't seem as if the jilted ex the police ruled Chris out as a suspect in Trey's beating a few weeks later. Chris and his father-in-law were also cleared as suspects. The law were sitting at a bar on the edge of town, enjoying a couple of shots of Angel's Envy, when Chris said, "Thanks, Dad. I owe you big time. The police were pretty sure I had something to do with beating up that stupid bastard," he continued. "Yeah, you were such an obvious target that they just couldn't ignore you. But you don't owe me anything. I owe you for what my stupid daughter did to you. You've been a good." George Taylor said, "I'll tell you what. You'll have to buy the drinks from now on. I could get used to this expensive booze," they both said, clinking glasses and taking a sip of the amber liquid. 2 months after the attack on Trey, Alex had been out of love so much that she almost couldn't stand it. She had met another young man for whom she had developed feelings. While it wasn't love she wanted to know about. She needed physical intimacy, and she'd had 2 husbands who provided that just a few months ago. She hadn't had intimacy in 2 months. Alex was desperate. She thought about discussing the problem with Trey, but their relationship was no longer as close as it had been before the attack. Since he'd been fine with being the second man in a polyamorous relationship, she didn't think he'd be able to help. When she was married to Chris, she decided that he should be fine with being the first man in such a relationship. She thought that she would apologize later if necessary, but she would not be the first to seek permission. Delman LaFleur was almost as big as Trey, 5 feet 9 inches, 98 pounds, and looked perhaps even a little better, though not quite as rough. He'd grown up in New Orleans and had a mix of Creole and old-fashioned Southern. He's 25, with a polite, less brash Southern accent. He works as a junior manager at a local firm. Alex met him in line at Starbucks a few months ago and has been wondering if he could replace her ex ever since. Trey was the husband in the new polyamorous trio. He decided it was time to find out. By the time he was able to have sex again, Delman was firmly in his former role as Alex's second husband. Alex met with her second boyfriend twice a week. This was during the weeks when she had kids. They were old enough to take care of themselves for the few hours she wasn't home on Wednesday nights and Saturday mornings. This was because she had done it when she was Trey didn't need to know any more about Delman than Chris needed to know about Trey, at least not until he somehow found out about it. Alex pointed out that their lives only intersected when the parents handed the children over to each other as part of their custody agreement. At some school events, Chris was cordial with Alex when they socialized, while Alex was constantly trying to gain favor with her ex. Chris's ex-wife told him that his children had found out about it. It seems that my wife has returned to a polyamorous life about 6 months after the fact. Josh and Kayla mentioned in passing that they often do early Saturday chores around the house while their mother is at the gym. They spend the rest of the day with friends, away from her. But she is still your mother, regardless of what she did to me. Be respectful and considerate. Chris said it's not just about what she did to you, Dad. She destroyed our family, Josh stated emphatically. Chris had to admit that his son's assessment of the situation was correct. But what made him raise his Chris was lost in thought, processing the news that his ex was once again sharing with the kids about going to the gym on Saturday mornings. He had never explicitly told the kids about their mother's infidelity, and as they were still young, they had never inquired about it. Chris decided to wait until the following week when the kids were at Alex's house. He borrowed a friend's car and parked a block away from Alex's house with 2 Dunkin' Donuts and a cup of coffee. She was already visibly upset, remembering the morning with Delman, and didn't realize she was being watched. He smiled as he watched Alex park the car on the street outside the house, which was divided into 2 apartments. He wrote down the address while finishing his second Bavarian cream donut and looked up just in time to see a large, bare-chested young man in only gym shorts greeting his ex at the door with a tender kiss on the lips. She definitely likes it big and young, Chris said aloud as he watched. He picked up his phone, pressed the button a few times and recognized the young man's name. A few more taps and he got a lot more information and chuckled happily. Thanks, Google. Trey Leem said he didn't recognize the ID number that popped up on his phone. He thought about sending the call to voicemail but then decided to answer it. Trey Leem, how can I help you? Chris, you can't help me, but I can help you. What do you want? It's a bit late for an apology, don't you think? Trey growled into the phone. I have no reason to apologize to you. Chris said, but for selfish reasons, I'll do you a favor. You don't deserve it. Do you know where your favorite girl is right now? I take it you do. Trey snapped. So she's with your kids? Well, she's with a kid, but not mine. She's definitely got her type. He's a big bastard, probably the same height as you but a little younger. God, if she keeps this up, she'll be dating sperm in a few years. Chris grinned. Let's say I believe you. Who's the? Trey asked. He's a bastard. According to Google, Delman Leffer lives at 1234 William Street. You'll have to find out the rest on your own. I'm out of coffee, Chris said. Alex was pretty worked up. How long has this been going on? I already told you I'd never share. A little hypocritical, don't you think? He shot back at the woman. It was fine for you to interfere in my marriage to my husband, but now that you've become my firstly, you don't want anyone interfering in your marriage. We've been together for months and it started when you were incapacitated. I have feelings for him, just like you. If your husband, the one who was really married to you, left you because of this, what makes you think I'm going to stay with you because of that kind of disrespect? Trey asked, are you staying with me because of that kind of disrespect? You're a great Alex, but no woman is worth that kind of treatment. I should have no problem replacing you, he replied, but you love me. You said you did. Did the woman shriek? Apparently not enough. Trey, he said, 2 weeks later. He was standing at the urinal in his office when he suddenly felt a searing pain. Nothing says you're in love like an STD, he thought, as he zipped up and staggered back to his office. He called the doctor and said he had an emergency. The doctor took pity on him. The doctor told him to report for treatment immediately, gave him an injection and wrote a prescription. The doctor's nurse came back with a notebook and pen and said she needed the names and phone numbers of all the sexual partners Trey had had in the last 2 months. He only gave the nurse one name, Alexis Temple. The nurse asked quietly, do you happen to know if she's had anyone else besides you during that same time period? Chris, I don't know about that, I just have a feeling Alex's stomach twisted when she got the call from the county medical center the next day. It seems like that idiot was sleeping with someone else against the rules and obviously without a contraceptive. Trey is going to be really pissed, she thought to herself. Alex was embarrassed when she had to give the nurse on the other end of the line the names of both of her lovers as required by law. Are you sure there were no others? The nurse asked again, perhaps a little too smugly. Alex's taste. I'm not, Alex started, but then realized how it must seem to a nurse who was just doing her job. No, no one else was. The next day, Trey was on the phone with Chris Temple. Ostensibly to return a favor Chris had done for him a few weeks earlier. Hey buddy, just thought you should know in case you need to get checked out by a doctor too, but I tested positive for gonorrhea. Alex is my only woman, so I know it's from her. After 8 years of bachelorhood, Chris was sure that he would never marry again. It suited him just fine, and he wasn't looking for a partner after his usual Friday night workout at the local YMCA. He stopped at a vending machine for a Gatorade, a drink for athletes. The woman standing in front of him at the machine didn't seem to realize he was waiting because she stood there as if she had all day. Finally, he coughed, causing the woman to jump with surprise and turn towards him quickly, looking her over from head to toe. Chris saw that she was Asian with long black hair tied back in a ponytail. She was dressed in what he considered cute workout clothes, a tight burgundy top and matching yoga pants. He thought very few women looked good in yoga pants, but this woman was one of the few. He muttered pathetically, wow, nice opening line. You obviously bought that bestseller, How to Woo Girls for Dummies. The woman snorted and Chris recoiled, raising both hands in surrender. The last thing he expected was verbal abuse from a 40-year-old woman. I was joking about the old soccer mom, she apologized, realizing that Chris wasn't trying to pick her up. It always seems to happen here at this car. It was about this time that Chris realized that he loved messing around with a pretty woman as much as anyone. The other guy got you, he said. The dumb guy role always works with smart women. You girls just can't resist rubbing a guy's nose in it. She smiled slightly. Yeah, okay, let's say I believe that she laughed. I'm Jade and you're Chris Temple. I'd really appreciate it if you'd make your, he said, I really need Gatorade. He had a big smile on his face. A year later, they got married in a small ceremony. Chris liked her sharp mind and quick tongue as much as her firm body. He learned that she was 51 years old, not 40 as he had originally assumed. He also learned that she had divorced her cheating husband about 10 years ago. She shared Chris's views completely. Jade said, "I don't share my man. I never will." She and Chris exchanged their stories. Jade said, "I will never do the two loves thing. You are my one and only love. That has to work both ways." The end.